The heat on the island was the kind that does not move. It sat over everything, a flat scrap of coral and concrete in the middle of the Pacific, 1,000 miles from anywhere, so small you could walk its length in a few minutes. There was a launch pad. There was a rocket standing on it, thin and white against an enormous empty sky. And there was a man standing a little apart from the others, watching it the way a person watches something he loves that might be about to die. His name was Elon Musk. He was 37 years old, and the rocket in front of him was the last one he could afford to build. 3 had come before it. 3 had failed. The money was almost gone. Not low, gone, down to the final scrapings of a fortune he had poured, dollar by dollar, into the impossible idea that a private company could build a rocket and reach space. He had been warned. He had been mocked. The serious people had told him, kindly and unkindly, that this was how smart men lost everything. And now it had come down to this. One rocket, one launch, one last chance on a forgotten island under a sky that had already told him no 3 times. Almost no one knows what he whispered to himself in the minutes before they lit the engine. This is that story. To stand on that island, you have to understand how he got there. How a man ends up betting everything on a 4th attempt at a thing that has failed 3 times. When Elon Musk started SpaceX, the experts were not gentle. Building rockets was the business of governments and giant defense contractors, of budgets measured in tens of billions and armies of engineers. The idea that a software entrepreneur from the internet years could start a company in a warehouse and build a rocket that reached orbit was not considered ambitious. It was considered foolish. People he respected took him aside and told him, plainly, that he was going to lose all of it. He did not listen. He rarely does. He hired a small team of brilliant, exhausted young engineers. He took them to a remote island in the Marshall Islands, a place called Omelek, because there was nowhere closer that would let them light the kind of fire they needed to light. They worked in the heat and the salt and the isolation, building something the world said could not be built. And in March of 2006, they rolled out the first Falcon 1, and they launched it. It failed. A fuel leak, a fire, and the rocket fell back into the sea less than a minute after leaving the pad. They went back to work. The second rocket failed too. That was March of 2007. This one flew higher, much higher, high enough to taste the edge of what they were reaching for. And then it began to roll, and the flight ended before it reached orbit. So close, close enough to break your heart. They had proven the thing could almost work, which in some ways is the cruelest result of all, because it means the dream is real and you still cannot quite hold it. They went back to work, and then came the third launch in August of 2008, and the third failure, and this one was different. This one hurt in a way the others had not. The first stage performed, the rocket climbed, and then in the separation between stages, the 2 pieces collided and the dream came apart in the upper atmosphere, and the third Falcon 1 was gone. It was carrying things, that rocket. Not just metal and fuel, it was carrying small payloads that people had entrusted to them, including, by some accounts, mementos meant to be sent symbolically toward the stars. When it failed, all of that was lost too. The failure was not just financial, it was human. It had the texture of a funeral, and by then, the money was nearly gone. They had spent years and a fortune to fail 3 times. Most companies do not survive a single failure like that. SpaceX had now survived 3. There was, by every reasonable measure, no reason to believe a 4th would be any different. But here's the part that turns a business story into a human one. After the 3rd failure in the wreckage of that August, the team did something that should have been impossible. They went back to the warehouse and they discovered they had just enough parts, barely, scraped together to build one more rocket. 1. And Elon Musk made a decision that the cautious, sensible, surviving part of any normal person would have refused to make. He decided to launch it as fast as humanly possible. Not in 6 months, not after a long, careful review. In weeks. Because waiting cost money he did not have. And because some part of him understood that if they stopped now, to think, to grieve, to count what was left, they would never start again. So a team that had just failed for the 3rd time, that was exhausted past the edge of exhaustion, that had every reason to quit, packed up the last rocket in the company and carried it back across the ocean to the island. And it was not only SpaceX hanging on that launch. This was the same autumn we have spoken of before. The autumn Tesla was also dying. The autumn marriage was coming apart. The autumn the whole watching world had begun to call him a fool. He was, in those weeks, a man with 2 companies failing at once, and almost nothing left to save either of them. If the 4th rocket failed, it would not just be the end of SpaceX. It might be the end of everything. No one standing near him on that island could have fully seen what he was carrying. That is the strange isolation of the person whose decision it all rests on. The engineers were carrying their work, and it was enormous, and they were magnificent. But they could go home, eventually, to other lives. They had not bet their entire fortune. They were not, at the very same moment, watching a second company die and a marriage end. They did not have the whole weight balanced on the single point of themselves. He did. A leader in a moment like that cannot let the others see the full size of his fear. If he breaks, they break. So he has to stand a little apart as he was standing on that island, a little apart from the others, and hold the terror privately behind a face that the team can keep believing in. It is one of the loneliest things a human being can do. To be the most frightened person on the island, and the one person who is not allowed to show it. He had spent his whole life rehearsing for exactly this kind of solitude. The lonely boy who learned to carry things in silence had become a man who could stand on a scrap of coral in the middle of the ocean, with everything he had ever built about to rise or burn, and keep his face still. But a still face is not a still heart. And in the hours before the launch, alone with the size of what was at stake, even he, the master of carrying things quietly, needed something to hold on to. The morning of the 4th launch came the way every important morning comes, ordinarily. The sun came up over the Pacific. The heat returned. The rocket stood on the pad where it had stood, waiting. He had not slept much. He almost never did in those years, and certainly not that night. There was nothing left to fix, no decision left to make, no equation left to check. The rocket was as ready as it would ever be. The only thing left to do was the hardest thing of all: to wait, and to hope, and to find out. This is the part of the story that no camera captured. The part before the cameras started rolling. The man, alone for a moment, in the last quiet before the loudest minutes of his life. What does a person say to himself in a moment like that? Not a speech. There is no audience. Not a strategy. The time for strategy is over. In a moment like that, stripped of everything, a person reaches for something much smaller and much older. The kind of thing you say to yourself not to convince anyone, but simply to keep standing. By the account of the deeper truth of who he is, what he reached for was not a prayer in the traditional sense, and not a boast, and not a plan. It was closer to a vow. 3 quiet pieces, said to himself, in the last still moment before the fire. The first was for the people who had trusted him, the young engineers who had given him their best years, the handful of believers who had put their own money in, his mother who had believed in him since before there was anything to believe in. He had carried all of them to this island, to this morning, to this single rocket. And whatever happened in the next minutes, he wanted them to know, somewhere, that it had not been for nothing. So the first thing he said to himself was a kind of promise to them, that he had given it everything, that there had been no holding back. The second was the hardest. It was permission to lose, because a man cannot stand on that pad believing only in success. The 3 failures had taught him that. So in the last quiet, he made his peace, as much as a person can, with the possibility that in a few minutes he would watch the last of everything fall into the sea, and that he would, somehow, have to get up the next morning anyway. He told himself he could survive even that. He was not sure it was true, but he told himself because it was the only way to keep his hands from shaking. And the third was the simplest. It was the one that the lonely boy from Pretoria had been saying, in one form or another, his whole life. One more time. Just hold together one more time. Not forever, not perfectly, just this once, just long enough. One more time. Then he opened his eyes, and he walked out to where the others were waiting, and he put his still face back on, and he gave the word. What follows when a rocket launches is the longest few minutes a human being can live through. The engine lit, the rocket climbed, and every single second after that was a second in which it could still fail, the way the others had failed. A fuel problem, a roll, a separation gone wrong, any one of 1,000 things that had already gone wrong before. He stood and he watched and he counted, and somewhere in his chest the 3 quiet things he had said to himself were holding the rest of him together. First stage, good. Separation, the moment that had killed the 3rd rocket. The seconds where 2 pieces of metal have to let go of each other cleanly in the dark edge of space with no one able to do anything but watch. It separated cleanly. Second stage, burning, higher now, higher than any of them had gone, into the place where the air thins to nothing and the sky turns from blue to black and the curve of the earth begins to show itself. And then the words came across the line that no one on that island had ever heard about their own rocket before. Orbit. They had reached orbit. The 4th Falcon 1, built from the last parts of a nearly dead company, launched by an exhausted team on a forgotten island, had become the first privately developed liquid-fueled rocket in history to reach orbit around the Earth. The island erupted. The footage that exists of that moment shows what you would expect. Young engineers screaming, weeping, embracing, the pure animal joy of people who have given everything and, against all odds, won. It is one of the great moments in the history of human spaceflight, and the people in it had earned every second of it. And somewhere in that eruption was a man who, for once, let himself feel it. But here is the thing the footage cannot show you. The triumph the world remembers was, for him, also something quieter and more complicated. Because he knew, in a way the cheering engineers around him could not fully know, exactly how close it had come. He knew there had been no fifth rocket. He knew that 30 seconds of failure at any point in that flight would have ended not just a launch, but a life's work. He had been standing on the knife's edge between everything and nothing, and the rocket had carried him by the narrowest margin to the right side of it. A few weeks later, NASA awarded SpaceX a contract that saved the company outright. A contract that would not have existed if the fourth rocket had fallen into the sea like the three before it. The whole future, the reusable rockets, the launches that would one day land themselves on pillars of fire, the company that would carry astronauts and rewrite what was possible, all of it traces back to that single morning, that single rocket, and the three quiet things a frightened man said to himself before he gave the word. The world saw the triumph. It did not see the whisper that made it possible. We tell the story of that launch as a story of engineering, of genius, of a man who would not quit. All of that is true, but underneath it is a smaller, more human story, and it is the one worth keeping. It is the story of what it actually takes to believe in something after the evidence has stopped agreeing with you. 3 rockets had told him no. The experts had told him no. The money was telling him no. The marriage was telling him no. The whole watching world was telling him no. Every rational signal a person could receive was pointing toward the sensible, survivable choice. Stop. And he did not stop. Not because he was certain. He was not certain. That is the part we always get wrong about people like him. He was as frightened as anyone would be. He stood on that island carrying a terror most of us will never know. The difference was not that he felt no fear. The difference was what he did while afraid. He said 3 quiet things to himself. A promise to the people who trusted him. Permission to lose. And the oldest one, the one from the boy who walked home alone in Pretoria. Just hold together one more time. And then he gave the word. Most of us will never launch a rocket, but most of us will, at some point, stand on our own small island with our own last chance in front of us and every reasonable voice telling us to quit. And in those moments, it helps to remember that the most powerful man on earth once stood exactly there, not fearless, not certain, just willing, and whispered to himself the simplest thing a frightened person can say. One more time. If this story reached something in you, you belong here. Subscribe and stay. There are more of these still to come.